Hello everyone, it is Glenn. Welcome to this members-only edition of a History Center live stream presentation. And today, we're going to be talking about something secret. We're going to be talking about spies and espionage. Shh. Of course, I can't do the entire broadcast whispering, but we want to just sort of give you, as we do here, a brief overview and in a nutshell view of what are spies, what is espionage, what is counterintelligence, what is intelligence. It's not just the stuff in your brain, saith the scarecrow, it is other things. So, going forward, let's start to establish some of what we're talking about. What is a spy? Most of us have seen a spy show. Most of us are fascinated with the idea of a spy. It's not always a guy in a trench coat with a fedora in the shadows. There's a lot more to spying, to intelligence, to espionage. And this has been going on since the beginning of time. It is usually associated with military or combat, or at least the conflicts and contests between armed groups of people or nation states or something like that. But a spy is someone who engages in this type of intelligence or counterintelligence. And we'll get into that in a second. So espionage. Espionage is the practice of spying. It is the practice of gathering intelligence against from an enemy or something like that. And counterintelligence are someone's efforts to prevent the enemy's spies from getting information from us, right? Spies are not soldiers necessarily. Their job is not to be soldiers. They're not fighters. They're not going on a field. They are someone who is very secretive, who is very sneaky, and who can get the information that a general or a government needs to make themselves more secure and more safe against their enemies. So a really good spy, you'll never know is a spy because they're not going to stick out. You're not going to notice them. You're not even going to know they're there because the secrets that they get in, they get the secrets, and they get that information to who they need to get it to. How long has spying been going on? Well, for a long time. Some of you may have heard of the Chinese military philosopher Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu is a fellow who has written, is famous for writing one of the earliest treatises on strategy and tactics and how to defeat your enemy. It's all very profound and it's all generally true. It may be that he was the first one who actually got a chance to codify all this and put it in writing for us to have, but almost all his advice is really good, and even though it happened, 500 BC, the things he says to do are general constants. And from a military perspective, from a government perspective, and from an espionage perspective, the constants seem to continue being true even right up until the present day with all the technology and things we have. Let me go ahead and just read you this one part. He has an entire chapter on the use of spies. And what does it say? What enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer and achieve things beyond the reach of ordinary men is foreknowledge. Now, this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits. It cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any decisive or deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. And here's his kicker. Hence, it is only the enlightened ruler and the wise general who will use the highest intelligence of the army for purposes of spying and thereby achieve great results. To sum up, knowledge is power. And if you are a general, are you a king or a prince even? You want to find out everything you can about your enemy. How many soldiers does he have? How well trained are they? How are his cities guarded? Who are the individuals within those cities that are controlling access through the gates? Could they be turned as spies? All this information you want to get, and there are different ways to get this. And again, Sun Tzu's universals tend to carry through to the present day. He lists 5 different types of spies. The first is a local spy, and that is someone who is from the enemy's area, right? If there's a villager or just someone there who can kind of keep an eye out for things and report back to you, that is a local spy. The inward spy This is someone within the enemy's own camp. It could be a soldier, it could be an officer, it could be a diplomatic official, but it's someone who works for the enemy who will then, in effect, become a traitor and tell you the secrets. There are converted spies. In other words, the spies that the enemy sends to you, and if you can capture them and turn them to your side, they can not only give you information, but they can give your enemy disinformation. They can confuse and confound your enemy. The fourth kind, this is sort of brutal. This is the doomed spy. So this is something that you may do to show the enemy, that make them think that they're winning. For example, if I have two spies and I have converted a spy, I may send the doomed spy into the enemy camp, right, to be spying for me, or at least that doomed spy thinks so. The enemy spy, the converted spy that I have turned to make the enemy think they're still their spy, will say, by the way, the enemy has a spy. I've discovered this secret. The enemy has a spy in a camp, and it is this person. And then they discover my doomed spy, and they kill that doomed spy. Now that is unfortunate for the doomed spy, but it makes the enemy believe that the information they're getting from my guy is correct. And then, of course, the last is the surviving spy. These are what we tend to think of when we think of secret agents, right? These are someone has recruited, that our side has recruited, has trained, and actually send them into an enemy area, whether it is a military encampment, whether it is an occupied city, whether it is a government building, and they are going in to get the secrets and get back out. Those are the surviving spies. So as you can see, even way back in 500 BC, they knew what spies were about. They understand the process. Now, moving forward, of course, this means that everyone's going to take advantage of spies. Even the Greeks and the Romans had different types of spies who could bring information to their enemy. We've got a picture here of some local person, perhaps in Germania, getting paid off by a Roman centurion to get information perhaps on his neighbors, who the spies are, and things like that. This was very common with the legions. And one example of how a spy could turn the course of a battle from ancient history is the Greek battle of Thermopylae. This was made famous, goodness help us, in that movie 300 with the Spartans and everything, that it's not exactly historically accurate. But this battle, Leonidas, who was king of Sparta, and his 300 men were able to hold off an entire army because the pass between the mountains and between the ocean was very, very narrow, literally about 30 to 40 feet wide. Now, 300 men can hold that area very, very well, and the Persians simply couldn't break through. Well, the Persians were able to find a spy who took a group of Persian soldiers around through the mountains on a little-known path and came in behind the Spartans. And when they did that, the Spartans were attacked from both sides and eventually defeated. Now, the Greeks go on to win the war with the Persians, but that is a great example of how spies and different information could bring about the defeat of an entire army in ancient times. Now, moving forward, from ancient times, there were some spies in the medieval world. We know less about them because spies tend to keep secrets, right? You don't want to tell everyone what's going on. But when it comes to the Renaissance, many different countries used spies, but one of the most interesting ones is Queen Elizabeth. We've had a program before on Queen Elizabeth and her golden era. Well, there was a fellow named Walsingham. And you have to remember that while we think of Queen Elizabeth and the golden age of England as this fantastically wonderful thing, and she's, the greatest queen ever, comparatively, England was pretty small militarily. It didn't have a lot of money. At this point, it didn't have a very big navy, and its army was tiny, and it was facing off against all the power of Spain and all the power of France. And what can a small country do against a great one militarily? Not much. But if you have a spy network and you can gain information and you can get into the enemy's camp or into the enemy's country and do damage and perhaps even assassinate certain leaders, if you can crush their spies within your country, then you will remain strong even though you're a much smaller country. And Walsingham was Elizabeth's spy master. And there are a couple of Great books about this, about Elizabeth's little spy network, and it goes on and on. It is fascinating. Walsingham was an absolute genius, and he did things in ways that a lot of the rest of Elizabeth's court did not agree with. It was considered immoral. He did have people assassinated. He found people within Elizabeth's own country of England who were planning to assassinate the Queen, and he found them, and he tortured them, and he got information of who their conspirators were, and then he went after the conspirators. So it was very effective. I think the best testament to how effective his counterintelligence and his espionage methods were is that England was in its golden age, and Elizabeth ruled for many, many decades, and when she died, England was one of the most powerful countries in England. They did not achieve that militarily. They achieved that through diplomacy and through espionage, something to remember. So this picture here, you can see, here's Elizabeth, and there's a Sir Francis Walsingham beside her. Who knows what secrets lies within that gigantic gown that he has on. Pretty interesting. Moving on from the Renaissance, we're going to skip a bit here because there's lots of interesting things, and again, we're only doing this in a nutshell. But from an American perspective, espionage and spy networks play a great, gigantic, huge role in our war for independence. Again, smaller countries, less powerful countries, can gain great advantages if they have good spies and spy networks, if they can determine where the enemy's going to move, if they can determine the enemy's plans, their strengths, and things like that. One of the most famous spy stories from the American Revolution is from a fellow called Nathan Hale, who was spying for the Patriot side, and he was discovered with information that he had been trying to get out of a British-controlled city with troop numbers and how many supplies they had and things like that. Well, he had put this information in the heel of his boot, and he was discovered, and they captured him. And here's the thing about spies. If you're, this is why they treat spies so bad. A spy doesn't want to be seen, which means they blend in, which means they often simply wear civilian clothing. They are not uniformed. A guy in a uniform is going to be very obvious, but spies can be a great danger, and someone who's considered a spy is not very well thought of from a military perspective. A real soldier, a real brave person wears a uniform and fights his enemy openly. A spy is of no account and cannot be trusted. So generally speaking, in the 18th century, if you capture someone who is a spy, you hang them outright. You don't need a trial. You don't need to treat them as a prisoner of war or anything like that. Spies are captured and they're hung. And this is what happened to Nathan Hale. And the famous part is, and you'll recognize this, is that when they said, "Do you have any last words?" And he said, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." And so Nathan Hale was hanged. And while those are noble words, and while it created a story about the bravery of those fighting for the cause of independence, it did cause a lot of problems because it did sort of break up one of those spy rings that General Washington had been depending upon. However, he was able to establish another spy ring. And here recently, this one has come to light. There have been a couple of folks who have written books about this, and they have different codes. And this is called the Culper ring. And this was not well known, but moving after the Battle of New York, he needs to know information because New York is controlled by the British at this point, and it is one of the biggest cities and where a lot of the high-ranking British generals are. So if Washington can get information out of New York, it is going to be of great help to his ability to use his army to know what the enemy is going to do. And so one of his soldiers, a fellow named Talmadge, sets up this spy ring. Now, we've got a video to show you. It's a little over 6 minutes, but it talks about this. And this is fascinating because for a long time, people didn't know who, the secret was so well kept, people didn't know who the Culper spy ring was, right? And some of them we still don't know because they kept it that good a secret. But people have done research and they've finally started to put a lot of this together. And there has been a 4-season series that came out recently on AMC called Turn. And And it was a very popular miniseries about this spy ring. Well, here's just, again, a very brief, about 6-minute video to give you all the information, better than I could, about the Culper spy ring.
The Culper spy ring was an espionage ring that operated during the Revolutionary War, created at the request of George Washington to find out the movements of the British troops and where they stored their ammunition.
And the Culper ring was the most effective spy ring during the Revolutionary War by using very simple methods, but very effective methods.
To understand why there was a Culper spy ring, first you have to understand that the Americans lost the Battle of Long Island. Just a month after we had declared our independence, all of New York City, all of Long Island was controlled by the British. And so if George Washington was going to know what was going on in New York City or anywhere on Long Island, he needed spies.
So we are at the grave of Abraham Woodhull, also known as Samuel Culper Sr. Simple farmer, the least likely person you would suspect as being a spy. He goes to Caleb Brewster. He's a whaleboat captain. He agrees to be a courier across the Long Island Sound. He needs Austin Rowe because Austin has a pub and he's able to go in and out of New York to get supplies.
Robert Townsend was a merchant in New York City, and he was in a perfect position to provide intelligence to Washington. Culper Sr., Abraham Woodhull, and Culper Jr., Robert Townsend. Those were their spy names. The information from Robert that was coming out of Manhattan would travel by a courier like Austin Rowe all the way out to Setauket. Abraham Woodhull would hand the letters off to the whaleboat captain, Lieutenant Caleb Brewster. He would sail them in his whaleboat across Long Island Sound to Fairfield, Connecticut. In Connecticut, the letters would be handed off to horse riders who would ride wherever George Washington was. Each word would be represented by a number. And that was a way that the Culpers could substitute a number for a word. So Robert had a number, George Washington had a number, Abraham Woodhull had a number. So unless you had his dictionary, you couldn't decode it.
Invisible inks were being used by the British. They were lemon juice or lime juice. What George Washington wanted was something that would not appear by simply heating the element. So he hired a man named Dr. James Jay, the older brother of John Jay, who was a doctor who had access to medicinal ingredients to create a sympathetic stain that was highly unusual but very secure. By knowing what Dr. J had access to, we could narrow it down to just a few ingredients that would have been accessible at the time. He used something called gallic acid, which came from the gall nut. And he found that ferrous sulfite, when rubbed over it, would make it appear. This was almost like magical.
There's another female member of the spy ring that a lot of people talk about, Agent 355. 355 in the Culper Code meant lady. It's a letter that is written by Abraham Woodhull in 1779. He only mentions this mysterious lady once, but I don't think that there's any way we can determine who that person really was. And some people even want to say that Anna Strong is Agent 355. And there was a person who lived in Setauket whose name was Anna Strong, and people can visit her grave.
They need Anna because she is able to see from her property on the neck where Caleb Brewster is on the Long Island Sound and in the harbors. So she would hang her clothesline, it'd be a black petticoat if she saw Caleb Brewster in town, and then the number of handkerchiefs hanging on the line would signal the Woodhull where he should go meet Caleb Brewster.
Unfortunately, as nice as that story is, it isn't supported by the Culper letters themselves. And if you can't find evidence that backs up your story, you just have to understand that it's a legend. If you want to know about the Culper spies, you have to read the Culper spy letters. There are over 190 existing Culper spy letters.
The Culper spy ring was an integral part of the success of the Army of the Revolution. Through misinformation, they were able to trick the British into thinking that Washington was attacking New York. So the entire fleet actually turned around. And then the French finally agreed to help us, and they were going to land in Newport, Rhode Island.
The only reason that that French fleet was able to get in safely without being attacked by the British was because of the work of the Culper spy ring. It was recognized even at that time that the dependence on intelligence was what gave the Patriots the edge. A British general said that Washington did not beat us militarily, he simply outspied us.
See, isn't that fascinating? And this is something, it's interesting because they're having to develop spy networks and espionage from scratch. It's not like there was a super secret spy master that came over from Europe and said, all right, George E.W., here's how you set everything up. It wasn't that way. They're having to figure things out as they go along. And again, it seemed to work pretty well. So what I've got here is just a little bit of some of those. They were talking about the diaries with the numbers. And with those numbers, you only have a series of numbers in that invisible ink that you're written. And when you do the reagent to get that to come out, if you've got a copy of the diary, you get a message. Because, why so secret? You don't want the British to know you're spying. And even if they capture the letter, they're not going to be able to decipher it. You don't want your spies to get caught, especially if they're good and if they're working. Because then you would have to reinvent the entire wheel, and then the enemy would know that you're up to something, and they would know that their secrets had been compromised. That's something that comes up again and again, are these codes have to remain intact. And if the codes are broken, then your secret is up. But what if we could break an enemy code and them not know that you had broken the enemy code? Let's come back to that in a second. So moving on from the American Revolution, we're going to get into another very popular topic. And again, I've just picked out a couple of examples here. There are a lot of great stories about espionage and spy rings in the American Civil War. It's really easy in the American Civil War because everyone speaks the same language, everyone lives in the same country. The only thing you have to do is kind of work your way around where the armies are. This is something that the last video mentioned, and Belle Boyd here, who is a famous Confederate spy. Women make great spies, and this is somewhat insulting, but folks figured that women just weren't smart enough to be that clever and to be spies and secret agents. So why would you suspect a woman? If a man comes through your military lines where your guards are, they're going to be very suspicious of that man. But a woman, she might be very pretty. She might be playing dumb to go along with that idea that women just aren't capable of doing this. So, as we'll see, women make fantastic spies because people very often underestimate their capabilities. Belle Boyd was one of those. She was in Richmond, and when the Yankees came in and some Yankees broke into her home and they threatened her mother, well, she took out a pistol and shot the Yankee. Right? She was found innocent because the soldier had threatened her and her family, but there was still a guard that was put there. The Union officer in charge of that guard, she ended up convincing him that she was in love with him, and she got many very interesting secrets about troop movements and troop numbers that she was then able to get to the Confederate government. There were lots of interesting, Harriet Tubman, right? She in effect is a spy. She is carrying secrets back and forth. As a person of color, she can go into the South and pretend to be a slave that, of course, everyone's going to underestimate, because how could a slave possibly be smart enough to be a spy? Well, Harriet Tubman was pretty remarkable, and she was able to go in, get information, and get that back to the Union Army. She was a fantastic spy. And so women really played a role in the American Civil War. Some of them were caught. Some of them were executed. Belle Boyd kind of escaped that because she kept pretending to be sick and things like that, and then she eventually fled to England, where the United States government couldn't get her. Alan Pinkerton, so this is Belle, and on the other side is Alan Pinkerton. He is a gentleman who was placed in charge of all intelligence for the United States government, or for the United States Army during the Civil War, and he himself would take on a persona, and he would go into Confederate lines. He would hire people to pretend to be Confederate soldiers who could then just get into the Confederate camp. And sometimes it's as simple as, counting men and what unit are you with? And do you know where we're going tomorrow? I sure would like to know. And then if he can find out, he can get back and tell Pinkerton. Pinkerton not only developed this huge spy network, but he was also really good at finding out who the spies for the Confederacy were. He had a talent for counter-espionage, and that was also important to be able to keep the Confederates from knowing where those Union forces, again, the Confederacy, militarily speaking and population speaking, was a smaller, weaker country than the United States during the Civil War. And so they tended to need to rely on spies and espionage more than the Union. But Pinkerton was able to cut that off, and getting the information was something that he could manage very, very well. Moving into World War I, we start to see things change a little bit. We start to see, those codes like the Culper ring used, they're very simple, but you had to have a diary. Well, what if someone could find a way to break those codes? We began to develop mathematical reasoning and using math to try to determine what those codes were, which means the codes got even more complicated. But we still relied on what we call human intelligence. And so way over there is a lady named Mata Hari, who is probably the most famous spy of World War I, one of the most famous spies of all time. She was actually Dutch. When the war began, the Netherlands were neutral. Her real name, let me make sure I get this right, was Margaretha Gertruida MacLeod, right? Some little Scottish ancestry in there. But she, as a member of a neutral country, she could move around a little bit easier. She fell in love with a Russian who was on the Western Front, a pilot. She wanted to go visit her husband who was wounded. The French wouldn't let her go to the front line unless she agreed to spy for the French when she went into the German areas. Well, she agreed to this and then started to try to get some information to the French. Well, then the Germans found out about it, and as Sun Tzu suggested, instead of just killing her, they decided to turn her into a converted spy. And so she sort of agreed to do that. The story of Mata Hari is very complex, and I unfortunately don't have time to go into it right now, and even I don't quite understand it because there were accusations, counter-accusations. She's still trying to play both sides of the war, and she's sending the Germans things that are not very useful, and so basically the Germans finally get fed up with her, and they let the French know, by the way, she's a spy for us. Why don't you capture her and kill her? And the French capture her, and she is tried. There are people who come in that are witnesses that she probably did not know, that could not possibly have known she was a spy. But France needed a scapegoat. They needed someone to blame for their appalling losses at the front. And perhaps that could be explained away if someone on the inside had given the Germans a lot of information. That way it would not be the fault of the generals. So in some ways, Mata Hari became a scapegoat for French failures. She was sentenced to death. And she was executed by firing squad in 1917. But again, I think she was 41 years old, but she had a very exotic life before this that made her, she was an actress, she was a dancer, and she could move in circles and could ingratiate herself to people almost automatically. She was very mysterious, and that is one of the most important things of an agent, of someone doing human intelligence. They have to be able to blend in. They have to be able to win the confidence of the people they're trying to get information from. It's a lot like lying, but that's what spying is, right? Is lying. Sometimes spying is simply not telling the truth until the right time. That's what this is. This is something in Germany, a new aspect of intelligence and spying called signals intelligence. This is not about agents going out somewhere, but the Germans, the British, who are turned out to be very good signal intelligence people, they could get the codes from Germany, the transmissions that Germany was sending, but this is in code. You can see they're using numbers, only they've got 5 numbers now, right? 4 or 5 numbers to stand for things. This is the Zimmermann telegram. And this is something that Germany had sent in code. This is not a military code, this is a diplomatic code. Diplomatic codes tend to be not quite so complex, so that the British were able to break the code. But of course you don't tell the Germans you've broken the code, so you can continue reading their secret messages. Well, this was a secret message from Germany to Mexico. And the telegram said, hey Mexico, why don't you come in on our side in the war? We can send you soldiers, we can send you military aid, we can send you weapons, and if you fight against the Americans, we will help you regain all the territory you lost in the Mexican War. Doesn't that sound like a good deal? Well, Mexico doesn't want any part of that, but the British intercept this. This is a bombshell, right? What if they were to show this to the Americans? Hey, Americans, Germany's trying to get you in trouble and get you attacked by Mexico. But the British don't release it yet because America is not in the war yet. They wait for the right time. They intercept this, they translate it, and they put it in a box for about 2 months. And they wait for the news to get to a critical point where it looks like the Americans might join the war. And what they want to do is they want to give that final push that will force the Americans. And at that point, they go to President Woodrow Wilson and say, by the way, look what we found. Not only did the Germans try to get Mexico to join in a war against you, but they used your own diplomatic telegraph machines to do it. That's not very nice, is it? And Woodrow Wilson says, no, it is not. And then, because that is the final push that causes America to enter into World War I, which with all that industrial might is finally what defeated Germany in World War I. So this is a great example of how there aren't actually people spies, but sort of mechanical and signals intelligence. And this really starts to set the stage for the rest of the 20th century, that it's not always people that are the spies, it's organizations and groups of people that are doing espionage and spy work, because nations and armies are becoming more and more dependent upon electronic communications. So when we get to the time of World War II, this has really, really developed, and there are things that are way out there. Again, you're not only trying to get information from the enemy from spies, you're not only trying to keep information from going from you to the enemy with counterintelligence, but there are also what's called huge deception programs. And so we've got just a couple of things here. Again, you can imagine how many cool spy stories there are from World War II, but here's just 3 to whet your appetite. So up there is Donovan. Donovan is an American officer, and he forms the Office of Strategic Services. And this is America's, basically their spies, right? This is America's spy network in World War II. And they develop methods where they can get spies in all the occupied countries, in France and the Netherlands, in Yugoslavia, everywhere. And he drops agents in, and it's all about not just getting information at this point, but the OSS is trying to disrupt the military in those occupied countries. So he's dropping in people who are explosive experts and assassination experts, and they're trying to create as much havoc within the communications and the electronics and the transportation behind enemy lines as they can. That's another thing spies do, right? And then there's this huge effort to try to trick the entire German military into thinking that the D-Day invasion is going to come at a different time and place than it actually does. And this is called Operation Fortitude. This is sort of one of those, not a counterintelligence thing, but a false information. You see this down here, this tank, if you look closely at it, it looks like a Sherman tank, but it's not. It's actually a giant balloon in the shape of a Sherman tank. And so what they did is to convince the Germans they were coming to a different place, they got all these blow-up jeeps and airplanes and tanks and put them at one point along the coast to make the German airplanes flying over that are taking pictures think that there's a big army there. They even get a room full, a giant room full of radios, and the radios talk to each other in the same room to make the Germans think there's that many radios going on for a whole different army. And it works. It totally tricks the Germans into thinking that the Allied attack is going to come at one place. They also use, remember our doomed spy? So the Allies use a doomed spy. They take someone who has already died, they put them in very interesting outfits, and they put a briefcase in their hand. And the briefcase has all the top secret plans for this false invasion, and they drop them in the channel, and this agent washes up on the shore. And German soldiers patrolling find this guy, and they find the briefcase full of these plans, and it's like, oh, we've actually got the plans. Look at this. We know everything they're going to do now. This was genius, and it worked perfectly. It worked perfectly. Poor Germany just couldn't get its things together in World War II, and especially when it comes to this. This is one of the most interesting aspects of spying in World War II, and it didn't involve spies going around and doing things. This is called the Enigma machine. This was an effort by Germans to keep their codes secret. It has, you can see up here, it has 3 rotors that can be set to different things, and there's a keyboard down here that has the letters. And as the electronic signal goes in, let's say I want to push a G, then those rotors will click, 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 and then another light will light up right here. It will be a different letter. And every time I push G, it may be a different letter because these rotors are continually changing. You have to know exactly how to set the rotors for it to work. This is almost impossible to break. There are 150 million combinations that are possible with the Enigma machine. That's 150 with 12 zeros after it, right? Again, almost impossible to break. The Germans think they have come up with a perfect secret transmission device. Well, it was almost perfect, but there was a British group headquartered at a place called Bletchley Park, led by a very, very smart fellow named Alan Turing. And Alan Turing was able to get a team together, and he basically built one of the world's first computers to analyze and figure out the Enigma codes based on what was coming through. Way too complex for me to tell you right now, but suffice to say that we have an entire group of scientists and engineers and electronic engineers finding a way to build a computer to figure out a super secret unbreakable code. And this happens in the 1940s, right? This sets the stage for how espionage is pretty much going to be from this point out. There are some spies around, but they're not as reliable. A spy can get caught, a spy can get turned, but machines are machines, and if you can intercept the enemy's transmissions and decode their codes, you've got everything you need anyway, and you don't need to set foot out of your office. Not terribly exciting, but quite the reality. Which moves us into the Cold War. And in the Cold War, that's very much what this was about, right? The OSS, under Donovan in World War II, basically turns into the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and their counterpart in the Soviet Union is the KGB. And there are lots of interesting stories. We don't know all the cool spy stories yet from this time period because a lot of it is still secret, right? Some of the most famous ones are like the Rosenbergs spy ring because we got the atomic bomb first. The Soviets got the atomic bomb pretty quickly because they had spies within the United States that were giving them atomic secrets, how to build atomic bombs. So there's a great example of how the United States got spies to basically become traitors, right? They were traitors. They gave our enemies information. And the enemies were able to develop very significant weapons very, very quickly. And the Cold War generally goes on from the late 1940s, well, on paper until the 1990s. Some people would say that it's still going on today, but we'll leave that to the current events people and not the history people. Right? But so much of the Cold War, as the technology develops, as the space race continues, this comes more and more to be a scientific and an engineering type of espionage and spying rather than just people doing the spy work and spy rings and secret messages with hidden ink. Of course, that's fascinating and that's great stories, but at this point, we are so far past that it's not even funny. But, and so today, we have, when we do talk about spies and gathering intelligence, we don't have to send people in. We have technologies like satellites, right? We have satellites that can fly over a country from outer space with cameras so good, we can read the front page of a newspaper at a newsstand. That's pretty good. Why would you send a person in when you can just look down? Well, to stop that, all you would have to do is put a tent over the newsstand, right? Not everything is, so maybe we'll get some infrared and we'll see where the heat is. We're able to track movement, we're able to see things like that, but it's still not perfect. And of course, as the world has come to depend more and more on computers and the internet, our armies are controlled by computer. Our nuclear weapons are controlled by computer. Our airplanes are flown by computers. We rely on computers for everything. And that has meant that one of the best ways you can attack another country now is to attack their computer networks. And so cybersecurity is now sort of the leading edge of espionage and spies. And again, it's not necessarily people breaking in somewhere. It's guys sitting at home, well, not at home, in a deep, dark government bunker, typing on a keyboard, trying to get things into other countries, trying to get their secrets that way, right? It's all communicated. The signal's out there. They just have to intercept the signal and decode the signal. And so that is unfortunately probably the future of espionage and of spying. There are still spies out there. There are still men and women who are in enemy territory trying to get secrets because there are still some things that you have to have people to do. Sun Tzu's right? You can't deduct these things. You can't rely on the spirits. There are some things you can only learn from other men, or here in 2021, also from women. So you have to still have actual spies out there doing spy things. I confess that I'm not a spy, but isn't that something that a spy would say? We love the stories of spies. It has come into the popular media so much, and we have so many things. Of course, there's James Bond up there. There's the Bourne Identity. We've got Spy versus Spy, which is a Mad Magazine cartoon. Some of you may recognize that, and they're all about bombs. They're sort of the caricature of the spy genre, right? Even kids are getting in on things with spy kids that turn into spies with all the cool gadgets. James Bond, like I said, is probably the most popular, the most action-filled type of spy story that we have. Fleming wrote so many novels and so many stories, and we continue to adapt those into movies, starting with Sean Connery way back in the glory days, all the way up to the present day. They're very exciting. They've got, women and car chases and spaceships and lasers and all that sort of thing. But James Bond is probably not really how spying goes. If you want a cool movie, or actually a miniseries about what spying was actually like in the Cold War, there is a great movie based on a great book called Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. There's been a recent movie with Gary Oldman, but that's fine. You can watch that if you want, but you need to go back and watch this miniseries that was actually made during the Cold War, and it's got our man Alec Guinness, and it's very British. So, it's think of Downton Abbey with a spy ring in the Cold War. It's very British, it's very low-key, but it is very, very interesting because things get so buried and so deep, you don't know where you're at, and the guys in the show certainly don't know where they're at. So check that one out. It's worth it. And like I said, Alec Guinness, how can you go wrong? There's a lot of different sources you can find too, but we've got just a couple here. Of course, there is the International Spy Museum. You can go to their website. I think they're taking guests right now here in the middle of the pandemic, but you can always check. If you get up that way, you can take a look and see. They've got lots of things. They talk about the Culper spy ring there, and they look at spying all the way up to the present day. The Culper spy ring, the book that I've got, the one that I've read is Washington Spies by Alexander Rose. There are a couple more out now, I think. I haven't seen them. Modern stuff, The Secret World, A History of Intelligence by Christopher Andrew is sort of just a general history of espionage and spying. And if you want to look, everyone likes the spy gadgets, right? And Lord help me, I love kids' books, because kids' books, if they're well written, they just do a great job of summing things up, and they've got awesome pictures. This is one of those DK books, if any of you know what those are. And this one's called Ultimate Spy, and it's just page after page after page, going all the way back to Sun Tzu and all the way up to the present day with lots of pictures of spy rings and things like that. Now, I know we've already got one question from Sue about that Walsingham book. The one that I've read is called Elizabeth's Spy Master. And I think it's by a guy named Hutchinson. I also think there have been, again, I read that back in grad school, but I think there have been a couple of more books written about Walsingham and the Elizabethan period of espionage, but I couldn't tell you what they were. But I do know that one is called Elizabeth's Spy Master, and it's pretty good. It goes into not just about Walsingham, but about some of the details, some of the missions, some of the people involved, and things like that. So there's spies and espionage in a nutshell. I guess the one thing I could say that I forgot to say at the beginning is, where does the word espionage even come from, right? It's from a French word, espionner, which means to spy, because a spy is an espion. That's more of a Spanish accent than a French, sorry. I would get my accents mixed up. But that's where the word espionage comes from. You can tell it's very much a French word. But if any of you have any questions, again, this is not an area of my expertise. I may not be able to give you all the answers you need and dig too deep, but I will do the best I can if anyone has anything they're looking for.
All right. Hey, everyone. It's Libba from Behind the Scenes. So if you do have any questions, I'll give y'all a minute to chat those to Glenn. As I was listening in, this is the question that I'm wondering. So say I'm a spy applying for the spy job. What are the top skills, your preferred skills that you would want in a candidate who is going to be a spy?
That's a good question. I know when I was in undergraduate school, the CIA would come around to universities and for the job fairs, right? And they would have a table there. And it's interesting, they were always looking for certain people. They do not recruit spies, right? They don't. They've got other sources to go to that. They'll go to the military, they'll go to special forces, they'll go to the Department of State. The Department of State is really where you want to go if you want to become a spy. Go work for them, learn languages, learn how that bureaucracy works, get some military experience, and then maybe you can become a spy. But to work in intelligence, I do know that what they want is they want very knowledgeable people, they want intelligent people, and they want people who can process information, think critically, see patterns. And I'm not just saying this to flatter myself. They love historians, apparently. The CIA loves to get historians, not necessarily to lead things, but because historians, if they get the right, if they come in with the right set of skills and knowledge base, they're just click. We're all the time, right, clicking and thinking about what about this and what about that and how could we do this and what if they had done that and things like that. So they want analysis, right? They want analysis. They want people who can take the information, process it, and come to reasonable conclusions. That's what they want to be when they're spies. They don't recruit spies. There's not any. I've looked in the want ads. It doesn't say wanted spy.
That's too bad.
I know. Wanted spy. If you want the job, you'll know where to find us.
So it looks like all we have are compliments for the
Oh,
presentation. Okay. So I think we've covered a fair amount. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Glenn, for this awesome presentation.
Certainly. Thank you to all of our members out there. We love you. You're the ones who keep us going, and we love doing these presentations just for you. So you already support us, but be sure and tell your family, your friends, maybe even your enemies. Slip a secret note in invisible ink to someone and let them know about the History Center and the great things we can offer them because of you. We'll see you later. Stay safe and take care.